On the cold grey morning of Tuesday, 29 July 2025, the atmosphere inside the Vredenburg Magistrate's Court was heavy with anticipation. The courtroom, packed with community members, journalists and law enforcement, sat silent as Magistrate Annaline Africa returned to her bench. At the center of the nation's attention stood a woman whose image had once stirred public sympathy. Now, she was the accused in a case that had gripped South Africa. Tiffany Meek, the mother of 11-year-old Jayden-Lee Meek, a boy whose brutal and tragic death left a community shattered and a country demanding justice. In a firm and unyielding tone, Magistrate Africa delivered the court's decision. Bail is refused. She cited deception, she cited the risk of obstruction, and above all, she cited the weight of the evidence. Circumstantial, yes, but deeply troubling. Tiffany Meek, the same woman who days after reporting her son missing had called for justice, was now seen as someone who, in the eyes of the court, had misled investigators and possibly tampered with the truth. Jayden-Lee's body had been found on the 14th of May 2025, lifeless, half naked and bruised, in the stairwell of the Vredenburg apartment complex, the very building where he lived with his mother. 2 months later, Tiffany stood before the court, accused not just of murder, but also of obstructing the administration of justice and for falsely implicating others in her son's disappearance, a move the state said was deliberate misdirection. The magistrate was unequivocal. It is difficult to trust the information the applicant presented after she misled this court, she said. The ruling went further. She questioned Meek's intentions, warning that her release could give her the opportunity to influence witnesses, particularly her family, and interfere with the ongoing investigation. It also raised fears that her presence back in the community would pose a threat to public peace, noting an online petition and the emotional state of the Vredenburg residents. For many in the public gallery, it was a win for the community. One resident, Piwetlatla, said he once stood behind Tiffany but now felt betrayed. "We want justice for Jayden," he told reporters. "This is only the beginning." Outside the courtroom, the National Prosecuting Authority shared in the moment. "The court has found her to be dishonest," said NPA spokesperson Pindim Jonondwan. "We are confident there are prospects of a successful prosecution." The Deputy Commissioner of SAPS in Gauteng echoed those sentiments. There were still loose ends to tie up, but he assured the public that the police would be ready when the trial begins. The next phase of the case is now set. Meek would remain in custody and the court would reconvene on the 17th of September 2025. But as the magistrate's gavel fell, one thing was clear. The fight for justice had entered its next chapter and Tiffany Meek would face it behind bars. Before we continue, I'd like to thank you for the subs, likes, shares and comments. It really helps us, a small, self-funded media publication, in our mission to tell South African stories in a meaningful way. We'll also be relaunching our audio-only podcast, Crime Central South Africa, and Season 2 of Unsolved Murders SA with a thorough deep dive into cases that have not only gripped the nation, but still linger in the fabric of our society. Now back to the video. The state's case against Tiffany Meek is primarily circumstantial, but it's been presented as compelling in its consistency and accumulation of key details that prosecutors argue point to her involvement in the murder of her 11-year-old son, Jayden-Lee Meek. According to testimony delivered during her bail hearing at the Vredenburg Magistrate's Court, the state alleges that Tiffany Meek misled investigators from the start. Jayden-Lee was reported missing on the evening of Tuesday, 13 May 2025, after he had failed to return home from school. Meek stated that she had no airtime and asked her mother to contact the school transport operator. The driver reportedly confirmed that he had dropped Jayden-Lee off at approximately 20 to 3 that afternoon. Police investigations revealed that security personnel at the complex where the Meeks lived also confirmed seeing Jayden-Lee enter the premises that day. One security guard testified, "I was the one who opened the gate for him." Another child who had exited the same transport vehicle after Jayden-Lee also remembered seeing the boy get off. However, Tiffany Meek is said to have interrupted the guard's testimony, accusing him of lying, a reaction that raised further suspicion. Despite late-night searches conducted by police, CPF members and family, Jayden-Lee was not found that night. The following morning, on Wednesday, 14 May 2025, his body was discovered in a stairwell of a nearby block of flats in the same complex. According to police, he had sustained visible bruises and multiple injuries. In court, it emerged that Meek had initially told police that she'd spent the night of the 13th of May at her mother's residence in Florida. However, police argued that her actual whereabouts were unclear, and this contradiction became a real focal point in the state's opposition to bail. Further forensic developments added weight to the prosecution's case. On the 16th of May 2025, police returned to the Meek's flat for a second search. It was during this visit that they allegedly found critical items, including bloodstained clothing, Jayden-Lee's school bag and underwear, all items that had not been found during their initial sweep on the 14th of May. Meek disputed this timeline in her affidavit, arguing that several police had moved freely through her home after her son's disappearance and that the discovery of such items days later was implausible. She described the police's failure to find these items earlier as impossible and claimed she was being framed. Moreover, the state claims Meek tried to mislead investigators by shifting suspicion onto her son's scholar transport driver, Mr. Kumalo, whom she had allegedly accused of being behind Jayden-Lee's disappearance. This accusation formed the basis of a criminal injury charge, as it was viewed as an unlawful and intentional impairment of the man's dignity, especially after police found no evidence linking him to the crime. Another charge, obstruction of justice, stems from the allegation that Meek deliberately placed her son's body in the stairwell of the apartment building to create the impression that he had been abducted and murdered by an unknown assailant. Throughout the proceedings, Meek maintained her innocence and claimed she'd been actively cooperating with police, including initiating the missing person report and participating in search efforts. She told the court, "I've been the person asking for proper investigations into the death of my child, and we believe that the police have failed in their duties." However, for the prosecution, it is precisely this duality, the outward cooperation alongside alleged deception, that forms the crux of the case against her. Tiffany Meek's defense is grounded in a bold claim that she's being deliberately framed for the murder of her son. From the outset, her legal team has portrayed her not as a perpetrator but as a mother who became a scapegoat for a tragedy she was trying desperately to understand. This claim formed the foundation of a sworn affidavit and was reinforced during her bail hearing. On the 13th of May 2025, Tiffany's day unfolded like any other according to her version. She was working from home when she realized that her son had not returned from school at the usual time of 3 p.m. Concerned, she said she asked her mother, Debbie Dunn, to contact the scholar transport driver to check on Jayden's whereabouts. The driver, as well as one of Jayden's schoolmates, confirmed that he had been dropped off at Swazi's place, the Fleurhof complex where Tiffany and her son lived. Tiffany maintains that once it became clear Jayden had not made it home, she took steps to find him. According to her affidavit, she reported her son missing at the Florida police station at around 7:30 p.m. that same evening. From that moment onward, she said she was in constant contact with police, pushing them to take action and find her son. But within weeks, the focus of the investigation shifted and pointed to her. Tiffany's legal representative, Advocate Nova Naidu, argued in court that she was being targeted in a state-led conspiracy to close the case with a convenient suspect. Naidu suggested that inconsistencies in the investigation, including contradictory witness accounts and timelines, should be seen as signs that the case against Meek was being manufactured, not revealed. One of the key issues raised by the defense was Meek's whereabouts on the morning of the 14th of May 2025, the day Jayden's body was discovered. Tiffany claimed she'd gone back to the Florida police station via a bolt ride to follow up on the progress of the investigation. However, this claim was disputed by the complex's security guard, who told police that he'd not seen a bolt vehicle pick up that morning. Adding to the complexity, the same security guard claimed to have seen Meek return to the complex that day, roughly 2 hours before Jayden's body was discovered. The defense maintains that this is incorrect and that she had no knowledge of her son's whereabouts until police made the grim discovery. Still, the implication from the state and the troubling inference left hanging in court was that Tiffany may have been at the scene before the body was found. Meek, however, remained resolute in her account. In her affidavit, she expressed disbelief and outrage at the accusations against her. "I fail to understand how I could have been charged with the murder of my son when I was the person fighting for answers from the police and doing everything possible to ensure that my child's killers were found," she stated. She described her arrest, which came 2 months after Jayden's death, as a cruel betrayal by the very system she had turned to for help. She also pushed back against what she called character assassinations in the public domain. Meek addressed rumors that she had abused Jayden in the past, dismissing them as fabrications. She said that a so-called private investigator had tried to paint her as a violent mother, even citing reports from Jayden's school about previous abuse. Meek categorically denied this. "I have never abused my child," she told the court. For her part, Tiffany insisted that she was a loving and concerned mother, one who had never stopped searching for her son and one who had been devastated by his death. In her view, the state's case rests on assumptions, not evidence, and the team made it clear that they intended to challenge every claim in the strongest possible terms. Ultimately, the defense's strategy in the bail hearing was to raise enough doubt about the strength of the case against Tiffany to warrant her release while she awaited trial. They argued that she had no prior convictions, posed no flight risk, and had cooperated with police from the start. And most importantly, they alleged that the inconsistencies in the state's narrative were not proof of guilt, but rather proof that something was amiss in the investigation itself. But despite the impassioned plea, the magistrate was not swayed. As we'll see when we get to the ruling itself, the state, the court found, had brought enough compelling circumstantial evidence to justify keeping Tiffany in custody. Still, The defense's narrative remains a key component of the broader story, that of a mother accused, a system questioned, and a child's death still wrapped in unanswered questions. When Magistrate Anna Lee Africa entered courtroom D of the Roodepoort Magistrates Court on Tuesday, the 29th of July 2025, the air was already heavy with expectation. For weeks, the community of Fleurhof had rallied outside the courthouse, many bearing placards with Jayden-Lee Meek's name, demanding justice. They'd followed every twist of the bail application, watching the proceedings with a keen eye and a grieving heart. On this day, they came for closure, or at the very least, a decisive moment in a case that has shocked and polarized. And that moment came swiftly. In a scathing and clear-cut judgment, Magistrate Africa denied Tiffany Meek's bail application, concluding that she had actively deceived the court and posed a real risk to the proper administration of justice if released. The magistrate did not mince her words. She ruled that Meek had intentionally misled the court, crafting false narratives about her movements on the day her son Jayden-Lee was killed. Meek had claimed that she had reported her son missing in earnest, insisting she was as shocked and bereft as any mother would be. But the court found this portrayal deeply flawed and at odds with the mounting body of circumstantial evidence presented by the state. At the heart of the ruling was a damning forensic picture. Jayden-Lee's blood was found on his bed, his school bag, and clothing inside the Fleurhof apartment he shared with his mother. The prosecution argued, and Magistrate Africa agreed, that it was inconceivable for Tiffany Meek to have been unaware of her son's death in such close proximity to where they lived. The final, irredeemable act, according to the magistrate, was the attempt to mislead police by placing Jayden-Lee's body in a stairwell just outside the family's flat, a move allegedly designed to deflect suspicion. This, the magistrate said, was a deliberate obstruction of justice. She cited Meek's alleged effort to falsely implicate others in her son's murder, particularly her attempt to shift blame onto other individuals as evidence of calculated interference in the investigation. These interferences are consistent with the proved facts and exclude every other reasonable inference except for the one set to be drawn, Africa declared, effectively tearing down Meek's version of events. Her concerns went further. Africa warned that Tiffany's conduct demonstrated that she not only had the capacity to deceive, but she could influence witnesses, particularly those within her family circle. If the applicant has the ability to deceive without hesitation, the magistrate said, then surely the applicant has the ability to influence witnesses, especially her family. She also acknowledged the public sentiment, noting that releasing Meek on bail could lead to unrest or even vigilante violence. Yet she was quick to clarify that justice cannot be served by sacrificing constitutional rights on the altar of outrage. Instead, she reiterated the decision to deny bail was grounded in the integrity of the case, the strength of the state's evidence, and the applicant's proven dishonesty. Ultimately, the ruling represented a major legal and symbolic victory for the community of Fleurhof, many of whom had initially stood behind Meek when her son was reported missing. As the truth, or at least the state's version of it, began to surface, that support quickly turned into a wave of heartbreak and betrayal. "It's a big win for the community," said Sphiwe Dladla, one of the residents outside court. "We stood by her side, but she betrayed our support. What we want now is the full measure of justice for Jayden." From the perspective of the prosecution, the decision was equally critical. Gauteng NPA spokesperson Phindi Mjolondwane hailed the ruling as a validation of the state's approach. She confirmed that the case remains circumstantial in nature, but stressed that the prosecution is confident that there are prospects of a successful conviction. Deputy Gauteng SAPS Commissioner Fred Kekana echoed the sentiment, noting that there were small loose ends to resolve before the trial, but that police had acted decisively and responsibly. And so, as Tiffany Meek was escorted back into custody, her face blank, her lips pressed together, the first chapter of a long, painful legal journey drew to a close. The matter will return to court on the 17th of September 2025 for further investigations. Until then, Tiffany Meek remains behind bars, her name now etched into the dark annals of South Africa's most disturbing child murder cases. Jayden-Lee Meek's story and the lingering question of what really happened on that tragic day in May will unfold in due course. But for now, in the eyes of the state, the court, and a grieving community, justice has taken its first firm step forward. This brings us to the end of our breakdown. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown informative, subscribe and turn on post notifications. Remember, we have more content planned, more cases to unpack, and true crime stories to dive into. So believe me when I tell you, subscribing to our channel and turning on those post notifications is absolutely necessary. Also, visit our news website, swisherpost.co.za, for the best explainers on every important event happening around you. No agenda, just the story.